Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more slug testing, and today we've got another new and very interesting shell to test. It's one that I have seen almost no testing with, so I really don't know quite how it's going to perform through my setup, so we'll just have to try it and see what it can do, because it's definitely a pretty interesting shell. But as for that shell I've got here today, I brought out some of the Brenneke TOPAS, whatever you want to call them, or however you want to pronounce them, Sabot slugs. They are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 2/3 ounce, which is apparently 309 grains, Sabot slug. So definitely a very interesting design here, and a much lighter weight projectile than what we typically see in like the 1 ounce projectiles for shotgun slugs, or at least 12 gauge slugs. Now the box claims here 1,673 feet per second at the muzzle. Very odd and specific claim. I doubt we're going to see that out of my setup today, but we'll see how close we get. And apparently these are essentially a 16 gauge slug that's been put into a Sabot. And as for Brenneke's accuracy claim here, it says for a 5-shot group you should see 2 inches at 40 yards. I hope we see a little bit better than that, because if we test that out at 100, that's definitely going to be opening up quite a bit. So we'll see what kind of accuracy they get based on this claim here. And here's what one of those shells looks like. That nice blue Sabot in there with that very common Brenneke kind of star shaped projectile, if you will. Definitely a very interesting design here. And I can tell you, I know they claim 2/3 ounce, which is lighter weight than a 1 ounce slug, but you can physically feel a very noticeable difference between this and a 1 ounce slug in kind of the same hull. There is absolutely a noticeable difference. So I'm definitely curious to see what kind of velocities and stuff we can get, and see what energy numbers these lighter weight slugs can actually give us. And as for the setup we've got to run them through today, I brought out my Remington 870 special purpose with the 18.5 inch fully rifled cantilever barrel on it. Up on top is a loophole VX1 2-7x28, and this has been a pretty good test subject for us when it comes to these type of rounds. Sometimes it really likes them, sometimes it really hates them, so it can be picky sometimes. So if this shotgun likes these rounds, then they should be pretty good across the board. So we'll see what those lighter weight Sabot slugs can do through this 18.5 inch rifled 870 here. But as for the test today, we're going to run it the same as we usually do with slugs like this. I don't have 1,000 slugs out here to shoot a bunch of groups with, so we got to make do with what we do have. So we'll shoot a 3-shot group at 50 yards and another 3-shot group at 100 yards. And of course, all of those rounds will be across the chronograph as well. Hopefully the chronograph plays nice. Sometimes it can get a little bit funny with Sabot projectiles. So enough talking, let's go over here and get you guys set up with a view of this target. We'll start off with the top smaller target at 50 yards, and then we'll step it out to 100 yards with the larger target on the bottom. So let's head over here and shoot these groups and see what kind of numbers and accuracy we can get out of them. Alright, let's go through our velocity numbers here real quick before we look at our target and just see what they gave us. The boss claim was 1673. Now, of course, I didn't expect to see that out of this 18.5 inch barrel, but ultimately, they didn't do too bad as far as velocity claim goes. We definitely had one down in like 11 or 1200 range. I just went ahead and deleted that, which we'll talk about why here in a minute, but it was definitely an error. The rest of them seem to be right up in the high 1500s, low 1600 range. So for a high, we had 1627. For a low, we had 1537. That gave us an average at 1598 feet per second with an extreme spread of 90 and a standard deviation of 31. So definitely not too bad as far as velocity goes out of this short of a barrel, but we definitely had some weird things going on with these shells, that's for sure. So let's go over here and look at our target and kind of go over what we saw, because it was definitely not what I was expecting, that's for sure. Alright, so let's take a look at our target here and see what we got. And I gotta say, these might just be one of the worst slugs that we've tested on the channel. They did not perform anything at all like I was expecting or hoping them to. And I think there's a pretty good reason why, which we'll look at even closer here in a second. But the Sabot design on these was terrible, to say the least, which I really think is what caused this accuracy being all over the place. Now, as for our top group, I was aiming at this target, and we had these two holes up here and that one all the way over there. So that was 50 yards. That big spread right there. That is terrible. And our 100-yard paper down here, we only had one that actually hit this entire cardboard paper at 100 yards, and that's this hole. So that is completely terrible. And I did measure that 50-yard group, so that being that hole over to that hole, and it came out to be right at a 10.3-inch group. And that's at 50 yards. That is terrible. And of course, our 100-yard group, we have no idea how big that is because we only had one hit the paper. Now, before a lot of you guys mentioned that my scope is off or something's wrong or whatever with my setup, that is, although not impossible, extremely unlikely, because I just finished testing last week's Brenneke KO slugs right before I filmed this one, and it was perfectly fine with that. I've never had a problem with this loophole scope at all, and based on what I'm seeing out of these Sabots, I think that's the bigger problem, is how these shells are loaded. So I do not think it's my setup at all. I think it's just a complete failure on how they are loaded, which is probably why they're one of the cheapest Brenneke slugs out there. So absolutely an accuracy failure, I'd say. But let's look at those Sabots, because I think that's where our problem lies. Okay, and here's a handful of those Sabots, and right off the bat, you can already tell they are pretty much absolutely destroyed. They just shredded into 100 little pieces all over my range, just everywhere. And I don't even have some kind of super aggressive rifling or anything like that in that barrel, and you can see it absolutely shredded these Sabots, which I did not expect to happen at all from a Brenneke shell. But feeling these now out of the shell, they are extremely soft plastic, almost kind of like a silicone feeling. Very strange. So I think that these just absolutely got disintegrated in the rifling, and when they flew out of the end of the barrel in pieces, there really wasn't a whole lot of control or stability in those projectiles flying down range, which is why we saw the accuracy we did. I mean, this is terrible. I've shot a good amount of Sabot slugs over the years, and I have never seen a failure like this, unless it was some extremely cheap Russian shell or something like that. So definitely a big disappointment from a Brenneke shell to see something like this happen. So I'm definitely not planning on buying any more of these slugs anytime soon, I don't think. Alright y'all, well, what did you think about those results right there? That is pretty much the definition of a failure in my opinion. I am 99% confident in my setup being perfectly fine based on what we've seen and what I saw just 30 minutes before shooting this group as well. I don't think it's my setup or my scope at all, and based on that Sabot and the absolute shrapnel I saw flying down range, I would put money on the fact that these were just not very well controlled as they were leaving the end of the barrel, which is why we saw what we did. We took 6 shots and had 4 of them hit a big piece of cardboard downrange. So that is absolutely a failure. Now, let me ask you guys, have you tested any of these slugs before, and is that the kind of results you've seen out of them? Or have you seen better results through a different setup? And what do you think is going on here? What is your opinion about it? Do you think that the Sabot material is just too thin or too soft, which is kind of my guess, and destroying that Sabot just ruined our accuracy? Or do you think that it's something else that's going on here? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because this is not at all what I expected to see from a Brenneke slug. But that's why you test things before you just stick around in the chamber and go out hunting with it and have no idea what it's going to do through your setup. Clearly, this did not work out at all for us today. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description down below if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.